I have to tell you, I am extremely concerned. Podcasting as a medium is an unbelievable innovation. Take you, the listener, the audience. You have the ability to sit, tune in, and listen almost as if you were in a college or business school class. And you can listen to somebody talk about subject matter in which they are an expert. You can leverage that from the convenience of your car, your office, virtually anywhere where you have a set of headphones or a stereo, a phone, anything. In the early days of podcasting, what I explained, an expert espousing the virtues of whatever field they're an expert in, is exactly what you had. Take business or business podcasts. You had Planet Money. You had Dave Ramsey. Take marketing. You had Scott Galloway and Kara. The Beancast is an excellent marketing podcast. In comedy, you had Dax Shepard. Smartless is a little bit more recent. Fantastic podcast. And then, of course, some really great niche podcasts. One area where I've found unbelievable niche podcasts is in writing, like The Essential Guide to Writing a Novel or Writing Excuses. Separate from that, though, you have Joe Rogan and the proliferation of Joe Rogan Experience. Joe is an incredible innovator and probably doesn't get enough credit for how innovative he actually is. He pioneered the Everything podcast. I'm just going to talk about a bunch of different subjects. Sometimes they're related, sometimes not. Production value is going to be very low, especially in the beginning. There's no editing, a lot of rambling. But in that rambling, he figured out a way to inject long-form conversation into the national dialogue, into the national media sphere in a way that really hadn't been done before. As amazing as that was, it's also now inadvertently set the stage for many of the issues I see emerging today in this form of media, in this channel. And this brings me to what I want to talk about today. 99.9% of podcasts suck. I'll say that again. 99.9% of podcasts suck. There's some big caveats. If you want to listen to a podcast purely for entertainment purposes, of course you can do that. Who am I to tell you what to listen to? That said, 40 to 60 million Americans listen to a podcast to glean business information, advice on how to succeed, on how to make money. This is amazing, like we talked about at the top of the podcast. With the mainstream media as polarized as it is currently, the fact that 60 million Americans can tune into a podcast to get a different perspective is a good thing and a testament to our First Amendment right. That said, this is where the problem starts. There are anywhere between 75,000 and 200,000 business podcasts. Based on these numbers, less than 0.04% of so-called business podcasts provide trustworthy information. In many arenas, and I'm not an arbiter of trust on many different things. If you want trustworthy advice on home improvement, on automotive, on fast fashion, on TikTok dance trends, count me out. But if you want trustworthy advice on business, put me right at the top of the list, especially as it pertains to the businesses of media, technology, and healthcare. I have spent the past 22 years growing both multi-million-dollar and billion-dollar companies in these sectors. And in that process, I've worked with hundreds of thousands of people and tens of thousands of wonderful companies. Great. Bully from me is probably what you're thinking. My point, though, is I've spent essentially the past 3 or 4 years preparing for this podcast, having listened to an incredible number of business podcasts, reading the reviews, digging into, has this podcast helped me? Has it not helped me? If it has, in what ways? But really trying to peel back the layers on the inner workings of how podcasts go about helping people in business. And the conclusion I've come to is that we are in the midst of an epidemic of bad business advice on so many of these podcasts. Advice that is either bad, nonsensical, or downright dangerous. And in many instances, it's a combination of all three. My takeaway for you here is that if you're listening to this, to a business podcast, you're trying to ascertain business advice. You are trying to take away some additional value, a business idea, an idea or insight into making money. All great things. But if you're listening to so many other podcasts, the 99.9 that I'm talking about, you need to be asking the following questions. Firstly, what are the credentials of the host? By that I mean, what have they actually accomplished in the real world? Not in the podcasting world, but in the real world. Do they have experience starting a company? Do they have experience building a brand? Do they have experience interfacing with clients, particularly those in the Fortune 500 or even Fortune 1000, where there's a very particular and prescriptive manner in which business is done? If you can figure that out, your chances of success go up tenfold, at least. In addition to that, what kind of successes have they achieved? Are they an entrepreneur, which is wonderful? Are they someone who's stated a company or a series of companies, like an intrapreneur, but they've worked their way up into a position of power? I don't think this is talked about enough, but it's phenomenally important. If they have achieved success in an organization, what does that success look like? Can they provide advice on how they've climbed the corporate ladder, on how they've worked to bring a new idea to life, on how they've become a leader, on how they've innovated or created the spark of innovation themselves, kind of nurtured the flame into a burning fire? All of that, very important. Finally, how much money have they actually made? Let me put this a different way. Do you really want to be listening to somebody? You have a limited amount of time. We all do, in life and on this planet. If you're listening to a podcast for an entertainment purpose because you just had a long day, you've worked your butt off, you just want to decompress and tune out, that's one thing. And I completely respect that. Everybody does that. It's a wonderful form of entertainment. But if you're one of the 60 million Americans who are tuning into a podcast to better yourself, and you can do both, by the way. This is not a zero-sum game. You can listen to podcasts to entertain yourself. You can listen to podcasts for business purposes. But if you are one of those 60 million Americans listening for business reasons, do you really want to be taking advice from somebody who has only ever made money off of a podcast? I think in many circles, talking about money, especially as you move up the corporate ladder, is considered gauche, is considered taboo. And I don't disagree. But at the same time, because so many of the thousands of people that have worked for me ask me questions like this, I believe in pulling back the curtain on how compensation, incentives, bonuses, options should be tied to or correlated to success. Let me tell you a story. Earlier on in my career, I worked for a big Madison Avenue ad agency. I worked a number of different jobs at this agency, but I started at the very bottom. I worked my way up, not to the top, not here. That would come later, but in a different industry. I worked my way up to solid mid-level. I was committed. I was devoted. And when I started, I was utterly clueless. I really was. But I knew how to scrap. I started working when I was 12 years old. I knew what work ethic was and is. I knew about commitment, and very slowly but surely I was able to hone and refine these traits. And I say slowly because for me, the path to success, and this honestly is what I think success for those who really work hard is like. It is very rare that you're an overnight sensation. You need to have something incredible. And all these people who start podcasts, by the way, this is what they think they're going to achieve. But the reality is that unless you have an absolutely unbelievably ingratiating personality, and what I'm really talking about is the intangible that is charisma, you need to be unbelievably charismatic, to draw people in, to get them to listen to you if you're looking for overnight success. And by that, I mean success in the first year or 2 or 3. Or you need to have an unbelievable amount of knowledge as such that you can turn it into a value exchange. And the value exchange is you, the listener, are going to give me your time. In exchange, I'm going to, and not just your time, but also your, the fact that you're listening. And, if I can build up a critical mass of listeners, I can monetize that. I'm not interested in that, but that's what many people do. And that's great. It's certainly respectable. But the value exchange is you give me your time and I give you my wisdom. But the problem now is the value exchange is unbalanced. You, and not you specifically, although maybe 60 million Americans are giving their time to the 99.9%, and they are not delivering. They are delivering bad, superfluous, as I said, in some instances, dangerous advice. And that is not a good thing. The path to success for me, back to the story, was very much, or looked very much like a hockey stick, where I worked very hard for a decade, making incrementally more money each year. And then all of a sudden, everything clicked for me. I figured out the calculus of business. I figured out the way to talk, the way to dress, the way to act, the things to think about, the way to comport myself in meetings, the way to impress senior leadership, the way to ingratiate myself into my peer groups. All of these things individually are important and will get you places, but together can be game-changing, can be absolutely game-changing. Back to the point here. The host of a business podcast should be making a commitment to you. Doctors take something called the Hippocratic Oath. We've all watched enough medical shows to know what this is, but essentially, as a clinician, I will do no harm. Business podcasters should have to do the same thing. They should have the same responsibility to do no harm and to make that commitment to you. If they can't explain to you why you should listen to them and not the 150,000 other some odd business podcasts, if that's me, that's a hard pass. And in this process, the past couple of years, I cannot tell you how many, literally thousands of times, I listened to 1 to 2 minutes of the middle of a podcast, 1 to 2 minutes the beginning, 1 to 2 minutes at the end. And in those 2 to 4 to 6 to sometimes 10, and sometimes I really had to dig deeper, 30 minutes. And honestly, usually you can tell in the first minute, but I was really trying to give podcasters, business podcasters, the benefit of the doubt. If you can't, in that amount of time, figure out what the value proposition is, it's not a good sign. Put another way, if you don't know what they're selling, I've got news for you, man. They're selling you. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and in this podcast, it starts out for like 20 or 30 minutes. And all they're talking about is how much money they're making. We're making millions of dollars a month, fucking millions of dollars, bro. Like, this is, we got $1 million month and we're so dope and we're amazing. I'm listening and I'm listening and I'm listening. And I'm like, good for them. That's great. If they're monetizing, they're not celebrities, I don't believe. If they're monetizing to the tune of multi-million-dollar months, their podcast, that's great. But the more I listen, the more I'm like, wait a second. This is a pyramid scheme. This is 100% a pyramid scheme. They're talking about core values. They're talking about mission and vision and integrity. And hey, like, I'm doing all these things and I'm working so hard. That's all great. That's phenomenal. There is nobody who will applaud hustle more than I. Half of the game is showing up. Anthony Bourdain, if you read Kitchen Confidential, has a great anecdote. He talks about in the food business, like it is a band of misfits. And these are his words, by the way. I've worked at, I talked about a moment ago, starting work at 12, it was in a restaurant. I worked in restaurants from the age of 12 to 21 in every single job imaginable. I started out at 12 in the back of an inn that would do 600 to 700 people a seating, a historic inn in New York. Beautiful, beautiful spot. And I was good friends with the owner, and the owner's sons were amazing people, and gave me a job at 12. But I was literally in the coat check on holidays and weekends. And then I worked my way up to pouring glasses of champagne at holidays. And then I worked my way up to busboy, working like grueling 14-hour days. Then I worked my way up to waiter. Then I worked my way up to room captain. And then it was sort of a lateral move, but I wanted to do it more. Worked my way up to bartender, got my bartending license, thought I was hot stuff, and did that. And it was amazing. And it was a really great experience. It was a great learning experience in how to ascend in a business. And it was the same business the whole time. And in addition to this, I'm doing a million other jobs, but this was like moving up the ladder at one particular business over the better course of a decade. And it was really interesting for me to gain insight into all the skills that, as I built them, resulted in upward mobility for me in that particular job, which again is, you can't discount how important that is. But anyway, back to this podcast, or not this podcast, the podcast I was listening to with the two guys talking about mission and vision and integrity. It's really blowing my mind that so many podcasts exist like this. These folks are brand shills, but the brand that they're shilling is their own brand. Their only experience is in monetizing the podcast, but doing so in a nefarious way. There is no value. They are not providing any value. The value exchange is give me your time and also your money. And I'm going to just take and take and take till I can't take anymore. The only thing these folks are motivated by is money. It is a tale as old as time. Go back and watch Wolf of Wall Street. I did that the other day. What we have today is tantamount to 100,000 Jordan Belforts. Or like, holy shit, I don't need penny stocks and pink sheets anymore. I don't need IPOs and option strategies. All I need as one of these Jordan Belfort clones is a mic and some software, and I've got 60 million freaking Americans to monetize. I'm not saying money isn't a good motivator. What did Churchill say of democracy? You know, it's the worst form of government except for everything else, and I'm paraphrasing. Capitalism, it's like the same thing. It's the worst form of economics except for everything else. Why does all this matter? And why am I so damn mad? I'm mad because as somebody who employs thousands of people and more over the years, many of these people are entering the workforce or newer in the workforce. And the thing that I have observed, especially over the past 3 to 4 years, people are not entering the workforce with the appropriate skills to do the job. I have an uncle, was fantastically successful, built a company from the ground up, sold it multiple times. And one of the things he's always said is, and this is because I think he kind of was sort of like a hippie, didn't take school seriously, didn't go to a great college, but wildly successful in business. And I'd ask him about that, and he's like, Justin, they teach you everything you need to know in your first job anyway. And that's discounting for doctors and lawyers and specialty professions. But today, and even in maybe some of those instances, I found that those entering the workforce in so many different situations are just operating differently. And I'm not saying they're not as smart, but the way they look at work and hustle and commitment is certainly not the same as the way that I looked at it circa 20 plus years ago. And I do think a lot of that is because their expectations in watching all of these social media videos on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube and shorts, and then even more so, listening to business podcasts have wildly unrealistic expectations. The goal of Capital Chase is to help you succeed in business, but more specifically, to empower you to make money in media, technology, and healthcare. One of the topics that, from a healthcare perspective, you, I am sure, have heard about and probably been bombarded with this messaging for the past at least year, if not two, is the rise of GLP-1s. Sometimes clinicians call them GLP-1s. GLP-1s are going to completely change and already have the face of healthcare, the face of American business, and in many ways, literally the face of society. If you watch TV today and you consume any type of mainstream media, I can rattle off the names of so many different celebrities who are taking GLP-1s. Whoopi Goldberg, Chelsea Handler, Amy Schumer, Oprah. I feel like men, for the most part, are less apt to discuss it, but you do have Elon Musk, tweeting about it. Tracy Morgan, Charles Barkley, Anthony Anderson, Al Roker. There are so many. Any celebrity, I'm not saying all, but maybe many, I should rephrase it. Many celebrities who have historically struggled with weight gain and or obesity, as tens of millions of Americans do. Shouldn't be ashamed of it. There are so many reasons why. Some medical, some socioeconomic, some related to access to quality food, whatever, I can go on. But many celebrities who have historically struggled with weight gain, but now out of nowhere seem to have dropped 8 pant sizes and just look like shells of themselves, in some instances good, in some instances bad. The likelihood that they're taking a GLP-1 is extraordinarily high. Extraordinarily high. So why listen to me on this? I have worked for 22 plus years in health and media and technology. For the past 8.5, 9 years, I've spent a tremendous amount of time in health and life sciences. In fact, sold my company to a larger company that commercializes clinical assets. And one of the things that we see is this massive move to GLP-1s, not just for weight loss, but for many other different things. And this is really, to me, what is incredibly interesting. And it's interesting because weight loss alone is a $50 billion plus market and will expand to 2 or 3 times that in the next 3 or 4 years just in the United States. In addition, though, GLP-1s are being studied for chronic kidney disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, polycystic ovary syndrome, neurodegenerative diseases, substance use disorders. They're already being used very frequently for this because they tamp down urges and cravings specifically for alcohol and opioids, osteoarthritis, respiratory conditions. I'll tell you a story. I was out at a cocktail bar in New York City the other night, and I'm overhearing a conversation between 3 guys next to me at this bar. And they're talking about, they're all probably in their mid-20s. These are young guys. They are all, by the looks of them, in very good shape. They're absolutely not obese. They don't fit the typical GLP-1 profile. And that's even a misnomer now because the typical GLP profile has even changed in the last 2 years. Every one of them is talking about how they're using a different GLP-1. And I kind of sidle up to them and I'm like, you guys are taking GLP-1s. I'm like, you're all in good shape. Why? I want to know. I'm an investor. I want to understand why. And each of them was like, well, for me, my blood sugar has always been an issue. I'm not a diabetic, but I have kind of high highs and low lows, and I never really feel stable. I feel like there's a lot of inflammation going on in my body, and I believe GLP-1s will help me with that. And they, by the way, are taking much lower doses than those that are often prescribed for obesity. But he was talking about how he has felt over the past 3 or 4 or 5 months kind of a leveling out of his blood sugar. And he believes that has led to lower inflammation. Another guy was talking about how he was more fit last year. He put on some weight. He went through a bad breakup, gained 15 pounds, and he just wanted to get back to the pre-breakup weight. And then the other sort of had a similar story. But they've talked about all the other benefits. It's helped my skin. It's make me feel more energetic. The inflammation piece is a big part of it. I've wanted to drink less. I don't, when I go out to eat, feel like I'm never full. I don't want seconds typically. And a lot of this stuff you guys probably already know as you've read media around GLP-1s and what they do and how they work. And that could be a whole different episode. But the net is that none of these three people, and two of them had girlfriends who also were taking GLP-1s, none of these people fit the profile for typical GLP-1 use. Why am I talking about this? I'm not advocating for GLP-1s. I'm advocating for making you money. GLP-1s, I knew 2 years ago, were going to absolutely blow up. I talked to my clients about this. I talked to my employees about this. This was like just such an unbelievable surefire opportunity to invest. For those who got in on Lilly early, the profits have been insane in the past 24 months. In 2022, Lilly stock was trading in the mid 200s, 258, 260. By the end of the year, it was 340, say. This summer, Lilly was at 981, reached 1,000 at one point. It's been down slightly lately to between 770 and 800. And I mention Lilly because Lilly has tirzepatide. Tirzepatide is the most efficacious GLP-1 at this point. It's a two-player market for the most part at the moment, but there are more entrants. It's Lilly and their tirzepatide product, and then Novo Nordisk has a series of GLP-1s as well. Novo has not had the same level of success, and it's because, as of recently, and that is largely because Lilly has shown, again, to be more efficacious in that Lilly can help you lose a greater percentage of your overall body weight. But the point here is that there's a couple ways to play this. You can play Lilly on a dip. You can research, and we'll certainly talk about and focus on some of the new players entering the space, or Novo Nordisk rebounding. And in addition to that, you can short, and I don't mean through options, although those can be used as a hedge. We'll talk about that in a separate episode. The proliferation of options in the hands of those who really do not understand them as financial instruments is also a scary issue. But the other play is shorting Bud, is shorting McDonald's, is shorting either fast food or, for lack of a better term, junk food. These are two areas where when you start to think about, okay, it's not just those who are struggling with weight loss, those who are struggling with obesity, it's the tens of thousands, if not millions of other people that are basically using GLP-1s off-label for little life change tweaks or little cosmetic tweaks, as is evidenced by my example talking to the folks at the bar. This is a situation where it is very, very rare that a drug completely reshapes a market. This happened with Viagra. This happened with several heart medications, but it doesn't happen often where you have such a massive blockbuster that it completely changes the way that people live. That's the show for today. I'm your host, Justin Chase. This is Capital Chase. We will be releasing 3 new podcasts in the next week, so stay tuned for more. Thanks for listening.